Newcastle Town Moor is a wonderful open green space that runs through Newcastle. It measures almost 1,000 acres or 400 hectares, making it larger than Hyde Park and Hampstead Heath combined, and even bigger than New York Central Park. The Town Moor was never set out to be a park though. It was instead an example of common land, an area where commoners were free to graze their cattle, like it remains today. This law actually dates back to an Act of Parliament of 1774. Today it is more well known for events such as the Hoppins, Europe's largest travelling fun fair, but in the past you may be shocked to find out it was used to be the location of the town's gallows. In the 17th century it was common knowledge that witches were in fact very real and very much among us all. In 1650 there was an outburst of witch hunting that took place in Newcastle during a period of economic, political and religious unrest. To understand why this came about, we need to delve into the city's past a little bit more. Firstly, the plague hit Newcastle in 1636, killing thousands of people. A lot of people wanted something or someone to blame this great tragedy on. There was also a less developed sense of medicine back then. Conditions which are now recognised medically could in the 17th century be attributed to witchcraft. Political and religious turmoil was also caused by the defeat for the Scottish Army in the Second English Civil War and the rise to power of the radical Kirk Party in Scotland, who attempted to create a godly society, a Puritan society rooting out witches and other offenders. As the Civil War began in 1642, due to Parliament rejecting the authority of Charles I, Newcastle declared for the King, whereas Sunderland voted for Parliament. Other areas of the nation, such as Scotland, also voted in favour with Newcastle rival Sunderland. This led to the city being captured for over 2 years, which included many Scottish Puritans. The Puritans were heavy believers of witchcraft. For example, there was a huge national witch hunt in Scotland in 1649, which led to it spilling over the border into the northeast, and the Puritan inhabitants now encouraging these activities and beliefs about Newcastle. The Puritans passed a new Witchcraft Act in 1649 and encouraged local presbyteries to seek out witches. A Scottish witch finder was brought to the city by the Puritan merchants who told the town crier to encourage people to accuse their neighbours as suspected witches. Soon now 30 people had been accused of witchcraft and were brought before magistrates and the newly arrived witch pricker. The role of a witch pricker derived from the belief that Satan furnished his minions with a demon called a familiar. This often took form of things like a cat who fed on witches' blood. And the point on the witch's body this happened was numb and devoid of sensation, and also short of blood, meaning that if you pricked the person accused of being a witch, you'd finally find a location where no pain was felt or bloodshed. This was known as the devil's mark. This was the method used by witchfinder General Matthew Hopkins, who tried suspected witches in East Anglia to secure successful prosecutions. This of course is utter nonsense, but witch prickers found a way in making this work. As I mentioned, they wanted results as they were paid handsomely if they successfully proved a witch. So to get this result, they'd use something like a false bodkin, which is essentially like a modern day stage dagger, where the pretend blade retracts into itself. It is also fairly easy to get a confession, as many people feared being pricked with what they thought was a sharp object. Although torture was illegal in England at the time, it was not beyond witchfinders to use forms of torture to force the accused to confess their supposed crimes. Some people were still tortured into a confession that they were in fact a witch. Sometimes sleep deprivation was also used to get them to confess. Eventually, in the Newcastle trials, 27 people were found guilty and 2 people were acquitted, and in one strange case, someone demanded another ordeal. They had to go through the witch pricking once again under close supervision. Out of the 27 found guilty, 15 women and 1 man were sentenced to death and hanged at the Town Moor in August 1650. Their bodies were buried in unmarked graves at St Andrew's Church, which is in the city centre of Newcastle. Although it is fairly unknown, it was the biggest mass witch killing in England. We know this all thanks to a book published in 1655 by Ralph Gardner. But what happened to the witch pricker after the Newcastle witch hunting craze had blown over? Well, he fled back to Scotland, but was arrested by one Henry Ogle, who was Chief Justice of the Peace, and forced to confess he was party to the death of 220 innocent people. He was then hanged in Edinburgh's Royal Mile, where there used to be public gallows. However, there is no record of his actual real name. Newcastle was one of the number of witch trials. In 1612 there were the more well-known Pendle witch trials in Lancashire, and in 1590 the North Berwick witch trials. In 1673 there were more witch trials in Newcastle when over 30 women were accused by Anne Armstrong from the Corbridge area. There are, however, no records of executions, so possibly the charges may have been dismissed. In recent years, the bones of those found guilty of witchcraft have reportedly been uncovered near the Church of St Andrews in Newcastle city centre. They were identified as such by the holes in their kneecaps. Apparently, witches had nails driven through them after their execution to prevent them from rising from the dead, although information surrounding this has not been confirmed. Do you believe in witches? What North East history video would you like to hear next? Please let us know in the comments and don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell.